Hello and welcome to our webinar. Digital platforms are becoming more and more important because not only do they offer new business and commercial opportunities, but they are increasingly transforming the economy and our society. And the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Morocco is therefore happy to present you today's webinar, New Opportunities, Digital Platforms and Marketplaces. So welcome. My name is Stephanie Regge, and I will be the moderator for today. And before starting, some general information. I would kindly ask you to turn off your microphone during the presentation. And this webinar will also be recorded and uploaded on our YouTube channel. You will also find many other interesting presentations and conferences there. So we invite you to visit our channel to have a look around after our webinar, of course. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat on your right. All these questions will be answered by us or by our speaker at the end of the webinar. His name is Nils Prestrich, and he is the founder and CEO of X-Tron, a digital marketplace in Germany and international. And a warm welcome for Mr. Prestrich. The stage is yours, and to everybody, enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Regge, for the kind introduction. I also want to thank the Chamber for giving me the opportunity to discuss digital platforms and marketplaces today. I will speak about some interesting aspects of platforms as I've discovered them and within the last few years, and in the very end mention perhaps how we operate as a platform as well. But throughout, I will try to rely on examples that you know well from some of the famous platforms that exist. I personally got acquainted with the idea of platforms really in 2016, and that was a major inspiration for me to actually start to build a platform of my own. But I will talk about this in a little bit. Let's first start with the slides. Hope you can see it all. Yes, the topic is new opportunities, digital platforms and marketplaces. Yes, so you all know platforms, of course, very well, I assume, at least in the B2C space. When the internet started to rise up, it was first seen as a sales channel, but since then, platform business models, as I would call them, such as eBay, YouTube, Amazon, and so on, have gradually overtaken the pure sale of goods and services via the internet in the last 20 years. And since the arrival of Amazon, Airbnb, Uber, and other companies, platforms have really become an integral part of everyday life. So no matter in which area they come up, they really turn the market upside down and trigger a lot of change. And in contrast to the conventional e-commerce, which is something that we've seen on the internet quite early on, platforms are virtual marketplaces that promote transactions between producers and consumers that to the benefit of all in the end of the day. So perhaps a bit of an interesting anecdote I wanted to talk about in this relation. Airbnb was a company that was started in 2008 by 3 people actually, who soon discovered that there was a demand for friendly and affordable accommodations provided by locals all year round, nationally and internationally. And within just 10 or 12 years, Airbnb has become a very large enterprise that is active in over 120 countries, with 500,000 properties listed on it, with millions of guests every year. So they've really made it from. They've really, in the end of the day, very much changed the traditional hospitality, the traditional hotel industry, without actually owning any single hotel room of their own, which is incredibly impressive, you could say, and a very, very good start to talk about this topic. So actually many successful platforms, many of the very famous platforms actually have a similar, let's call it similar DNA. So it's usually companies that focus on either on a particular geography, on a very particular product, and then actually challenge to some extent the traditional concepts within the industry that they're tackling. Of course, only if they are successful in their. It's not easy for a platform to be successful, but that's if they are successful, they can have a very big impact. So Uber would be one, which has really changed the taxi business forever. There's Alibaba with a billion different products, and there's platforms like Facebook, of course, which is by now the biggest media company in the world. So practically any industry in which data and information are important, and that applies to very many industries, you can say, of course, there is at least the potential for vast changes through platform models. So that means businesses or industries where the information itself, like education, for example, is actually the product, let's call it, or where access to information and prices and so on, business trends, is valuable. So yes, perhaps one more thing to say about this slide actually is that to maybe just provide a basic definition as well. So a platform is really a business which is in the end of the day focused on enabling interactions which create value between users that are outside of that platform in a way, like external consumers, external producers, and so on. And the platform actually provides, or is, a framework and provides infrastructure where this exchange can take place. And it sets it in a way. It makes sure that certain conditions exist that allow an effective interaction. So it's about, in the end of the day, causing or enabling matches between not just interactions, but also in a way matches between the needs and the offerings of the different users. Yes, so let's go to the a little bit to the next aspect of it.
We maybe can do our first survey at this moment.
Yeah, sure.
Because now we have a little definition what are digital platforms, and you now see the survey on your screen. And the question is your company currently using digital platforms or marketplaces? Yes or no? And you can just click on the screen and answering. Okay, thank you. I see we have some answers. We will wait for some more answers. Okay, there's still some answers. Click on it now on your screen. Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna close it and now show you the results. So it's very interesting. There are a lot of people who say they are using digital platforms, but on the other hand, there's some who don't use them. So very interesting for everybody, I think. Thanks for your participation, and we're gonna listen now to the presentation once again.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Regge, for actually finding a good way of a good point in time to start the to ask this question. I think that was very helpful. Yes, so perhaps I'm seeing. Wait, one second. I'm seeing the presentation from the start again. Is that?
Yes, it's not in the presentation mode at the moment.
Got me out of the, okay, 1 second. Should.
And once again, maybe if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and Mr. Prestrich will be answering the questions at the end of our presentation.
So sorry, I somehow went out of the. Yes, so just to give you the next section is a little bit about well, success factors as well, and also about differentiation between the classic business models and platforms. So maybe summarize what I'm going to say is that the platforms differ very much. That the business model differs very much from the classic linear business models. So that means that in the linear, I'm going to call it a linear business model. What you have is that there's a step-by-step approach. So for creating and actually, let's say, transferring value, step by step. So you create a product, perhaps use resources, you create, manufacture something, you sell it, then you put a system up that kind of where that product goes through. So basically from manufacturer to the point where it's being bought by the consumer, or where the service is, or where service is delivered. Well, in the case of a platform, it's rather a more very different arrangement. So it's a very complex relationship in the end of the day between all the different groups, like producers or manufacturers, consumers, and the platform itself, which all are kind of arranged or put up in a network of different relationships, and they basically will conduct their interactions with each other via the platform. That also means they already get in touch. That's a little bit my second point, with each other in the value creation phase. So the users, the customers, can actively participate in the creation of the actual product or service. So it's the users very much who create the value. It also means platforms are successful. Even what we just saw with Airbnb, even though they don't have the resources, which are actually very important to the industry, they provide this platform where participants come together. There's also a very important idea, which is the network effect, which basically means that each new user makes the platform more attractive to the existing users. And I will now talk a little bit more about some of the aspects that I raised here. So one thing is that so basically, maybe to answer the question, why platforms are so interesting as a user, and obviously for platform companies themselves. So one thing that platforms do is that they do not need gatekeepers anymore. So which increases efficiency. That means that, for example, there's no gatekeeper between the user groups. Like if you think about a publisher, a classic publisher, which is obviously a great thing, but nevertheless, the publisher can only look at so and so many books to publish because of the limited resources that they have to actually to check all the interesting books that are out. When you have a model like a platform model, you are able to in the end of the day allow every single book to get out there and reach the readers. So that's a very different system, which means that the gatekeeper in a way is replaced with market signals. So the market says which everything will go on the market, and the market says what is most interesting. So that's actually something that's one big difference. The other thing is that what I've mentioned already, that platforms unlock or free up new sources of value creation. So the example with Airbnb, that means, or that implies that a platform like that at least has the potential to grow faster if they are not constrained by, let's say, the classic resources that are needed and that were needed in the past in a certain industry. So it's really unlocking, in a way, new supply. It's about unlocking new supplies to the market, and it's a very interesting idea that there are firms that don't have the same kind of fixed costs that can compete with strong and incumbent companies. So in the end of the day, for the consumer, that also means, because of the platforms that have lower costs, in the end of the day, lower costs to create value, that also means that the transaction costs for the users usually decrease. At least that's what usually happens. And perhaps one last interesting aspect about platforms is that they very much rely, the classic platforms, at least in B2C, many of them rely very much on the feedback of the users to actually replace their supply chain. Well, what's also yes, let's I think would be interesting to then go to the next slide to try and talk a little bit more about the what makes platforms attractive, and also what the network effect. So I believe there are many factors that make platforms attractive, but some of the most important ones I've listed here, and that is customer focus. So the customer, in fact, for the platform is everyone else. So you know, the idea to put every one of the users at the center, to very much focus on the customer, on the customer's needs, and to also implement new changes, new features, and new ideas very quickly once there was certain type of feedback. So platforms, because of the model that they have, are able and are very much in need for looking out for the customers, and be quite radical in trying to create interactions or just generally an experience which the customer likes. That's also because they are in a way competing with an incumbent industry, and therefore have to offer a better experience in the end than the traditional way. There's also openness, which is very important. So the platform is open to other partners and providers, which can create its own ecosystem. There's an interesting anecdote about Facebook here. I mean, Facebook was competing with MySpace and other platforms at the time. We talk about the 10 or 15 years ago. It was competing with a range of other platforms. It wasn't the first, but what it did differently is that Facebook was way more open to third parties than the others. For example, it allowed a whole ecosystem of online games and online game producers to come onto the platform, which created a very, very strong pull factor for additional users to get onto Facebook. And at the end of the day, they had to be careful that they weren't kind of hijacked or taken over by these new participants. But for them, it turned out to be a very successful model. Another aspect is innovation. So platform providers invest much more in innovation than traditional companies. That's basically how it is. Again, it could be as well because there are new players and because innovation is very much at the heart of their product in the first place. Also, transaction costs, I've already said it a little bit. The processes in many cases are very digitalized. It depends on the platform, but ideally they are very digitalized, and therefore, and for the other reasons I already mentioned, the transaction costs are comparably or significantly reduced. And one last thing is particularly agility. So there's a core that obviously platforms have, but they can quickly adapt to changing market conditions by offering additional features, for example, and creating new business potential thereby. Yes, so I think that's one interesting part, and I will still talk about the network effect in a little bit. Yes, over the basically how platforms use this network effect. I think that's something we should still talk about a little bit, and that's really in the end of the day, I think a good example is Uber here. Basically, as you know, Uber matches drivers and potential cab riders and vice versa. So of course, as new drivers come onto the platform, that sets very interesting kind of developments in motion, because these new the new customers will actually and the new cameras will actually tell the people that they know, their friends, about the app, and some may join themselves, including as drivers. And because of this, the waiting time for the riders will decrease, and there's also less time when drivers have nothing to do, when they are idle, basically doing nothing and waiting, because there are more users. And that again, because there's less time when drivers can't do anything, that actually means that they can make more money, or the same amount of money at least, when the fares are lower. And the lower fares again will lead to more people riding with Uber, using Uber instead of classic cabs. So that's a very interesting effect. And that really means, in the end of the day, I think it's a good explanation for the network effect, because it shows that really there's a significant value that users create, new users create for the existing users by coming onto the platform. That's the case, and should be the case with most platforms. So that should also not be mixed up with virality. Virality means, the product is very popular, and lots of that's something that's rather that's rather affecting the users that are already on the platform. In this case, it's about people that come onto the platform as new users and create value for all of the other people already, or the other companies already on the platform. Yes, so perhaps just to give it to come to the last topic, and that's really what the impact of platforms is, also on you directly, and what it will be in the future, and what you can do about it. So over the past 2 decades, let's say since the year 2000, you can say platforms have very much transformed and changed the economy. But we believe that the greatest impact is yet to come. So that will be when platforms are used widely by companies, and also between companies in the B2B sector. And we think that the transformation is already very much starting to happen. It's already happening in certain parts, and nevertheless, many companies, especially smaller companies, but actually generally many companies, think it's something they should just observe and be kind of passive about. But we think that could be a big mistake, because the technology for change is already there in many cases, and because new business models can now be implemented more easily than the past. So it's a very important thing that companies try to, we believe, adapt the use of platforms, or even try to really come up with platforms themselves for their existing business models. So those are 2 things we think are important. It's very important to find answers to this, let's call it challenge. I think it is definitely a challenge. It's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. But it's also a challenge. So I think something that's very important is really to actually embrace it. And I wanted to talk about perhaps a few examples here. So, well, let's actually go back to the other. Sorry. That is. Yes. So one thing that would be important to know is just how other companies have actually dealt with this, perhaps with this challenge. So there is something that has happened recently, and that's what I've just talked about, incumbents actually becoming platforms themselves to some extent. You know, companies in a way that operate these linear business models I've spoken about before, they are, you know, of course, a little bit, or at least some of them see that they are a little bit in a difficult situation where there's a danger that, you know, platforms may to some extent threaten their business model, the classic business model. You know, regarding, for example, because of the lower transactions costs, for example, the platforms actually have. But we think that there's actually lots of potential to take on this challenge. So one example would be Nike, for example, which the producer of US producer of sporting goods. They've actually found a very intelligent way to thrive within this platform economy. They had very traditional model, but they have also tried to buy into the industry by taking over, you know, wearable technology companies. For example, Fuelband, which was a company that produced wearables, digital wearables basically, and with that, Nike was able to actually find a new source of growth, kind of like in the direction of Apple, which also used to be very much a hardware producer, and now integrated many platform models. So actually, these companies have managed, Apple and Nike, just as examples, have managed by using digital models, by actually embracing platforms to make their other products, their current products, their hardware, you could call it, more interesting. So they have said, we sell a great, you know, iPhone, or we sell a great shoe, but we now also offer digital products, actually, which are linked to platforms and which increase the value of our existing product line. That's something that is that's very interesting, and it's also happened across manufacturers that sell in the B2B sector. So if we think of companies like GE and Siemens, for example, they have been looking for solutions to connect their machines to the Internet of Things, where they bring together their data in a centralized platform at the end of the day, and where their customers can kind of learn from each other and interact, and this data can interact with each other. So yeah, I think that's a very important. That's very important to know. There's an opportunity to actually break into the space yourself, or there's an opportunity to at least try and use platforms that already exist for your benefit. So in particular, I think there are quite a few interesting developments, in particular for exporters and importers, like many of you are. We see, for example, the rise of a few blockchain platforms, which is something that we believe is quite interesting, because it may make it easier for international companies, or for companies with international interests to conduct their business. So that could also be interesting for, of course, German and Moroccan companies. However, it the problem in that case is that these platforms are not very independent. The blockchain platforms are those are initiatives of international banks, and they also, unlike what I said before about the average platform, these platforms actually are very costly. So we believe it's something that's only interesting for very large companies in the in the billions, that have revenues in the billions, and that have the ability to fully digitize all of their processes today already. So actually a very, very limited kind of group. But we actually thought that it would be very, very interesting to have a marketplace in this space, a marketplace to finance and secure to finance and secure international business, exports and imports, that can be much more easily used, because it is a very interesting market to tackle. It has many of the hallmarks, many of the characteristics that I talked about earlier. So it's very much about information, and in fact, in this market, information is very rare, and the players are very intransparent. I'm talking about the fact that it's very difficult to actually see, for example, which bank, which international bank can offer its service at which price in a certain market. So what we said is we would develop something which can be easily used, because it can easily be accessed and implemented from anywhere without having to be without onboarding, without installation, and something that's also at the same time very affordable, because it's only has a price per transaction. So what we do, we see ourselves as an export tech, and we combine the search for international tenders, international tendering, search for trade finance, and for export finance under one roof. And I will just talk about it for a few minutes to give you a very brief idea of it, and later on I can still answer your questions on platforms in general and on us in particular. So what it's about is it's a highly automated matching platform or marketplace, actually, where importers can tender international projects for exporters to see when they're interested in foreign technology, and where they can also find the banks that will secure these transactions and finance them, in fact, even long term. We developed this with German manufacturers in machinery and plant manufacturing, and we work with a very experienced IT company which has already built successful platforms in the past. So it's very much a very strong focus on all three, on exporters, importers, banks, and especially on companies that are active in emerging markets like Morocco. So the problems we want to tackle actually go partly a little bit beyond the classic platform topics. So they are very, very, very classic marketplace platform things we do. So we try to solve the problem that there's not enough contact to European exporters currently, that Moroccan companies, for example, don't have the access to the key technology or the choice that they would need, that there's insufficient competition between banks, which leads to high financing costs, that it's very difficult to actually find financing at all. Sometimes there's no financing available over the traditional channels, by just asking one bank, because the core bank is not able to offer a certain product, financing product in a certain market. there's simply not enough access to these banks that can provide long-term financing in euros, for example, or dollars. There's also very high time requirements for searching for these financing solutions. And last but not least, a insufficient overview over the financing history as well. So on the platform, importers can tender their import needs and reach exporters. Importers and exporters can reach over 50 international banks, which makes it much easier to find attractive offers for small volumes and for difficult markets, and for this generally very specific and challenging transactions. Companies can also save a lot of time by going through the process on the platform, because it's very easy to understand. It's fun to fill out, and it's very structured. So offers can be compared easily, and the communication between exporter and banks is much more efficient. And lastly, there's very good overview and analysis of past financing, the past financing history, which gives companies a great idea of where to improve and where to optimize their sales processes or their procurement processes, their relationship with banks, with their house banks, for example, and also it's also very helpful for compliance purposes. So just to give you a very brief overall insight, these screenshots, you can see how it looks like. It's a very straightforward process. It's also possible to choose which banks you want to work with very specifically, or which banks should receive your request. And then you can compare it in the last step and choose which offer you find most interesting. So yes, just to reiterate, it's a very, the basic idea is that can be easily tried out. It can be used or brought into use for very specific transactions whenever you think that the platform can bring a value for you, without any kind of commitment or having to pay a regular fee when you don't know how often you will actually use it. But we recommend that it makes a lot of sense to use it very regularly, of course, because much of the additional benefits that our platform offers is also through regular usage. When it comes to efficiency and overview, that's something you can profit most from when you use it regularly. So yes, I think I said enough from my side, and I'm very happy to hear your questions. Of course, I think Miss Regge will probably still say something now about this part of the webinar. But I'm very happy to talk more about the network effect. For example, I've not said everything because of the time restrictions on the presentation, but I would be very much open to say a little bit more about one or two things on platforms.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation. And before going into our Q&A part, we have one last really quick survey for you, and I would kindly ask you to participate. And we just started real quick, and the question is, how likely is it that you or your company will try out X-Tron within the next few months? Likely, unlikely, or not sure? So thank you very much. It's gonna be real quick, so just take some seconds, click on your answer. And of course, we have our chat, because now we're going to our Q&A part. So you can put your questions into the chat, and then I'm going to explain how this works. Okay, some more answers, maybe. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, now we see, really nice. Thank you very much for your participation. And yeah, now you have the possibility to ask all your questions directly to Mr. Brestrich. To do so, you can raise your hand by clicking on the little hand icon on your right. And after I call you out, you can unmute your microphone and ask Mr. Brestrich your questions, or you can just write the questions into the chat and we're gonna ask them to Mr. Brestrich. So that's how it works. And I have already some questions. So we're gonna start. So the questions we got is, where do you see new business opportunities in Morocco and African countries in the B2B sector?
Well, I mean, thank you for the question. First of all, I'm not sure how much of a general answer you want, but
I think a quick answer.
Yes, I think from our point of view, we actually it just goes a little bit in the direction of what I said about a little bit earlier. So we think there's generally in the B2B space, at least, there's a great need for, or these countries in general, there's a very large need for further investment at the end of the day. Africa and the Middle East are regions of the world where you have strong population growth. Because of the strong population growth, there is an immense need to invest in infrastructure, but also to provide people with more consumer goods, and all of that requires, in the end of the day, additional technology to be brought in. So what we see this very much on the platform. We see Africa and the Middle East are very important for us, and we see that there's a big need for technology from Germany, for example, which can then be brought to use locally and help to raise to raise the standard of living, for example, to bring the countries on a to provide them with more with the opportunity to produce more efficiently, for example, and to become also less dependent in the long term from the from places like Europe and the United States. When it comes to platforms, I think it's also something where we think there's a great use for it, and the platform should become more common there, because in the end of the day, what you have is you have a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. You also have a lot of you have a lot of companies that don't have sometimes the resources or the global connections like some American companies do, and therefore the information exchange in an efficient way that platforms generally offer is something that is particularly interesting in these markets.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answer. The next question would be, what would you recommend to companies that want to become more active in this field? So in general, digital platforms, what are just shortly the first steps?
Well, there's really I mean, there's several things that you can do. So one would be to see. I think the easiest thing is to analyze, your processes within your business, and to see, which, for example, where there's potential, where you see potential for improvement. So where, for example, where you can create extra value, where you can find new services, valuable service for your customers, and how you can use the data that you have for your advantage. So one thing would be to you have a look at, when it comes to, you have a business which starts with where you purchase you purchase certain resources and services, up to the very end where you sell to the consumer, which is something the consumer or another company, of course. And in that case, you can look at which of these aspects you think can be improved, and you can then find a platform which you can try out for that particular part of your business, where you can see, okay, is that maybe something that we can use in addition to what we already do? So when you say, for example, we see possibilities to improve, to find, when it comes to customer acquisition, which is actually at the very end, then you can see, is there are there platforms and marketplaces where I can present myself as a company to reach these new to reach an additional group of people or customers. That would be one thing. You could try out which platforms work for you, and in that case, I would go for platforms that you can use and try out easily, where you can say you understand the value easily, and you can also try them out without without a big amount of hassle, without a huge investment cost. There are some platforms that are very that require a lot of let's say time and money to get into them, and there are other platforms. I believe ours is part of the other side, other platforms which are easier to try. And that's the one thing. And the other thing is, really to try to build your own platform, but that's something that will definitely cost you quite a few resources, and that's something you should only do once you perhaps have a better grasp, of where exactly you think the platform, can help you. Maybe if you see the platforms that exist don't actually do exactly what you need, or if you think there's a lot of room for improvement there, or something like that, or something you want to be able to where you think that you would be, it's very, very particular and very much for just your products, like what I talked about a little bit with Apple and Siemens and so on. Although I would generally say it's more interesting if you try to have other, on both sides. You have on the producer side and on the consumer side, you should have various players. So I would rather suggest to maybe, if it really comes to you wanting to develop to becoming a platform business yourself, to also have a look at other companies you can cooperate with to do that.
Thank you very much. Now I think we're nearly at the end, but I have one last question. It's about innovation, which is really a key point, I think, in this area. So how can we support and promote innovation within our company? What would you say?
First of all, thank you very much for the question. I think that's a question we that's a very interesting question actually as well. It's also a very broad question, which is good. I would say that that's not something that's easy to answer, but in general, we have seen, and I think it does come back to a few things that are closely related to this topic. Actually, it's very important to be to have a certain culture at your company which promotes innovation. So that means that every employee, down to the to those that are not in the management, every employee should be should receive the encouragement that their voice and their opinion and their and their ideas are valued. And in fact, it would be helpful to have regular events, we believe, every once in a while, maybe every quarter, every half year, every year, where you really give people this opportunity in this room to bring in their ideas. And in fact, to actually take that up as well, not just to bring it in, not just have a day where you would talk about these things, but also to perhaps then take up these ideas and try to actually evaluate them in a proper process. So that's something that's very important. And also another aspect, apart from the being open for these opinions, being also open for critical opinions or opinions that question your parts of your let's say of your conduct or of your traditional behavior, traditional ideas, is also to be very to be to some extent agile enough to try to be agile, to just which means to just kind of to try out new ideas in a limited to limited scale, in a limited environment, but to actually give them a chance, and to not just spend years of planning every single time when you can bring something either to the market or to a limited amount of customers, or to make some changes in a certain when it comes to a certain part of your business, to just try that out without without years of planning beforehand, to just try to be a little bit like a startup. I think that's also something that's helpful, and I think it will actually be worth it. I think having more innovation. There's so many great ideas at companies that are not being put into not tried out at all, that people have, and they're not talking about it enough. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's very, very good if you are able to make use of that and to the benefit of your company.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. So unfortunately, we are now at the end of our event, but I want to thank Mr. Prestrich for this great webinar. It was really an interesting presentation. I think we learned a lot, and really nice conversation, Q&A part. And of course, I want to thank all our participants for being here. And I wish you a great day and hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you very much for having taken the time. And if you have further questions, either on platforms or innovation in general, or on X-Tron in particular, please just get into contact with me via the email you will have in the presentation that I think Ms. Regge will send to you after today.
Exactly. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye bye.